And medicine is the number one modality of Western approach to dealing with mental issues, and yet the cause has not been remedied. And so the cure is there, but it lies in a different meta system. It's not within the symptoms.
So what Haydn and I want to do in this episode is share 3 major points with you around depression. One will be the 5 major emotions that all human beings encounter and live with in their lives, and they have all ranges of healthy and unhealthy. We're going to share the source of depression and also talk about a more enlightened understanding of depression. Hello and welcome to Becoming You, the Path to Consciousness, where we apply spiritual principles to everyday life. I'm Terry Hasty.
And I'm Haydn Hasty.
And we're really excited about this time with you today because it's on a topic that many people deal with.
Millions.
Right, and we're going to share with you not only the true origin of depression, but provide you with a more enlightened understanding of how to approach it.
I have my PhD in psychology, but most of what I know about depression came from my own life experiences of dealing with it and working with 3 different teachers over the course of my life. I spent 10 years working with Dr. Tony Speed of Farr Associates way back in the day, but he would be the one that would change my entire life and the depression that I dealt with when I was young by teaching me what the source of depression was. And of course, as I said, it was life-changing. I stopped being depressed literally the day that he showed me what was really going on. And, it was like all of a sudden it just came to an end. So I'm not trying to suggest that that's true for everybody, but, it certainly was for me.
Well, you started out depressed.
Well, I've often shared with friends that...
I'm not making fun of that or anybody else who deals with that.
No, of course not. But I've often shared with friends through the years that when I was born, I came out, looked at my circumstances and went, oh, God. And it was like we immediately went into depression. But that was way back in the day. I was born in 1951, and, kids didn't go to psychiatrists and psychologists back then when you were 10 years old. It was just something that, that you dealt with and worked with and not really knowing what it was and what was going on.
And I think for me, I came out into the world and looked around at my circumstances and said, score. I didn't have to deal with those same dynamics that you did growing up. And yet that's not the source either.
Well, it's also not necessarily better.
Right.
Because of the value of what can be learned from having to deal with depression. The size of the problem is always mathematically proportional to the size of the opportunity, and that certainly would turn out to be the case for me.
And the true source of depression, its origin is not what we think it is. It's not our parents, it's not our circumstances, it's not what happens to us.
No, it's an existential crisis. It's an existential dilemma of not understanding one's existence and the purpose of being in a physical body.
And that's why there's really been no cure for depression, I think, because we're trying to solve symptoms or the surface cause, not the true source.
Well, this is the problem with the modern psychological approach to depression, which is to address and try to alleviate the symptoms of the emotional suffering without addressing the cause. And medicine is the number one modality of Western approach to dealing with mental issues, and yet the cause has not been remedied. And so the cure is there, but it lies in a different meta system. It's not within the symptoms.
So, what Hayden and I want to do in this episode is share 3 major points with you around depression. One will be the 5 major emotions that all human beings encounter and live with in their lives, and they have all ranges of healthy and unhealthy. We're going to share the source of depression and also talk about a more enlightened understanding of depression.
And right before we do that, let me share, I like being realistic about these situations instead of just speaking intellectually or sounding as if we are removed from it. It's not something you ever dealt with in your life, but it was something I dealt with because of and I can make this pretty quick, because of the abuse that I went through as a child for about 7 years, from age 7 to 14. I developed this trigger in me that when it got activated, it's like the voice was saying, it's like my emotional fear was just screaming, I'm getting ready to die. It was when I felt trapped, that I was not going to be able to escape the harm or the assault in any way. And I developed that trigger, but of course we're children. We don't know that we're doing that. We're just trying to figure out, the individual is just trying to figure out how to survive and how to be okay. And it works, but it's going to collapse as one gets older and will turn on you, literally, and sabotage your relationships, your, even your career if you're not careful.
And it's fascinating to me that you and your 2 brothers had different responses to that trigger of I'm trapped, I'm going to be hurt, I have to get out of here. And as adults, you've all had your burdens to try to come to terms with it.
The individual has their own approach to it, but it's still kind of pretty much
the same trigger?
Kind of the same stuff that's getting triggered. So what happened, I think it was about 20 years ago. I will be 75 years old in August, and I think it was around 20 years ago. You and I were married, and I was working out west and was on my way to work out there, and was in the regional part. I think I was in the Salt Lake City airport, and was sitting there waiting on my plane, and all of a sudden I looked up and saw that the flight had been canceled. And what I wasn't aware of was that button got triggered. Now, it had been a very long time since I had dealt with that. But here it was getting activated, and I wasn't aware of it. And I'm sitting there, and my mind is interpreting this situation as deadly. That I'm getting ready to get hurt, I'm getting ready to get harmed because I'm trapped in this, in the regional section of the airport, and my mind is saying, you're not getting out of this,
You flipped out.
And I lost it. I mean, inside, I wasn't misbehaving or saying anything to anybody, but inside, I thought I was just going to explode. I'm just about to lose it. So I started calling you and saying, I was cussing and, get me a blank, blank, blank flight out of here. Get online and see if you can,
This before you could do it on a cell phone or whatever. And then you'd hang up, and I'm like, I don't even know what's happening.
Right, because I'm pacing. I'm losing it. And I called you, and you asked me, you said, what are you doing? And, I was very aggressive and said, I'm almost yelling, what do you mean, what am I doing? I'm trying to find, no, Hayden, what are you doing? And in the conversation, all of a sudden, I was able to see what had happened. So
I remember asking you the question, you're acting like you're trapped or like a caged animal. Because you were so upregulated.
Well, you have to keep in mind that same button was going to be what allowed me to survive all that. But on the other hand, as I said, to be consistent, as you get older, it turns against you.
Right.
You know, it's no longer, you're not surviving anymore. You made it out. Now you have to reorganize and reconstruct how you look at it. But of course, a lot of people
and
don't.
It wasn't that event, it was events from your childhood, but they were being superimposed over
It's
this
templated.
event of an adult. But it felt like to you, and I can say this as the one listening to you call me 4 or 5 times and hang up,
Yeah.
that you were genuinely in the fight or freeze,
absolutely.
mode. Yeah.
It wasn't something, that I was
No.
making up. But what I wanted to do once I realized what had happened, I wanted to, to do my thing, which is to go into it and allow myself to, basically, all I wanted to do was just cry. But I can't do that. I'm not going to do that in the regional airport. Then some airport staff is going to be coming over, So I did find a private place as best I could. They're hard to find in the little small sections of the regional sections in the large airports. So I sat down in a chair and put my elbows on my knees, put my face in my hands, and just started breathing and moving inside. I think it was maybe 5 minutes later, I started letting my radar out. I've got to, okay, let's start paying attention and figure out what's going on inside of here. And I started really listening to what was going on around me. And after, it could have been 5 or 10 minutes, I stood up. I walked over to this woman who was about 4 people up in the row, and I said I wasn't, intentionally eavesdropping, but I think there are about 4 or 5 of us right up in here that have the same problem. And what I'd like to suggest is let's get together and let's see what we can do. Let's see if we can figure out a solution. So we did. I can't remember exactly, there were 4 or 5 of us, but we took another flight to another airport that we were not scheduled to go to, but we got to that airport, rented a van, and we were about a 3 or 4 hour drive away from, where we were all going. I think we were all going to Missoula, Montana. We got there somewhere between, if I remember, around 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was at work on time, 4 or 5 hours later. So, once I was able to get some clarity, I was okay. But, it came out of the blue. I thought that, because I had not experienced that and seemed like decades almost, and all of a sudden here it was, appearing
And
again.
it didn't come out of the blue, but it came out of the past, or it came out of the sludge of
It's
memories.
the trigger.
Yeah, the trigger.
That is, it's the residue of depression, of why people, constantly go back into it. So it's okay.
Almost impossible to have an experience in the present moment without it being linked, especially an emotionally charged experience, without it being linked to the past. In all of our work, the last 30 years that we've worked with companies and teams, individuals around one of the topics being emotional intelligence, that was a common thread that people would get, I get activated back into a past experience, and I templated on this one. It's just how the mind works. And when we talk about these 5 major emotions, so this is our first kind of main point, and if you wanted to, if you're at a place where you can sit down and chart this out, it could be really helpful for you.
Just take a piece of paper, turn it landscape. At the very top of the paper, write the word expression. At the bottom of the paper, write the word repression. And now we're going to go over the 5 major emotions, and you can write those emotions from left to right, take up the whole page to write those, space them apart, and write these 5 emotions, and consider listening to what we have to share with you about what those emotions look like
And the impact
when they're repressed versus when they're expressed.
And how to really use that, not only for healthy relationships, but more importantly for your own clarity, centering, balancing, and well-being. So we remembered them and have always taught them through the acronym LEAFG, LEAFG, and the 5 major emotions are love, envy, anger, fear, and grief. So that's LEAFG.
Right. It's a good way to remember them.
Growing up, from the beginning, from the moment you kind of come into birth, we start learning how to repress every one of those normal, healthy emotions. And it's just it's not blaming anybody. It's not anybody, not saying your parents didn't do it right or teachers or whoever. It's just part of our socialization strategy. But love gets repressed with simple things like, don't talk to strangers, stop being so happy, basically, like, tone it down when little kids are being silly or happy or
don't hang around these people.
Right. Don't hang around those people. Don't talk to these people aren't okay. Those people are, that kind of thing. But largely it's it's a strange thing, but don't be too happy. Like, don't be too expressive. That gets annoying, or that's loud, or that's not the right time. And sometimes it isn't the right time, to be joyous and boisterous. So we get told to tone it down, so to speak.
Right.
And we
That's
get really
enough.
good at it. That's enough. That's enough, Terry. But when love is expressed, there's a generosity, there's attachment, connection, and attachment in a healthy way. Love, there's sharing and joy and happiness and all of those things. And even in the workplace, if I am repressing love, I'll watch you flounder. I'll watch you not know what to do and just kind of observe. And if I am expressing love, I may say, would you like some help with that? Or I know something that could be useful.
Well, the expression of love can take place on a daily basis at work, of thanking colleagues for a job well done, of taking time to write a letter to your boss for the wonderful job that you have. But when love gets repressed...
And especially love of ourselves, that's the most damaging. When we repress love to ourselves, we do so much damage when we're so negative and...
Well, it always results, the repression of love always results in materialism, possession. The absence of love or the repression of love is actually the true source of greed. I know that sounds a little weird, but when love is expressed, when you move into love, you're very happy to share. I didn't say you give away everything that you own. I said, but you're very happy to share because you know that there's plenty for everybody. But, that can be quite a lesson to learn in life.
And if I can't even love myself, then I'm going to try to collect things and possessions to make myself feel better. So that's the expression.
A million different ways that individuals
And you can
do
explore that some more in your own life and see, how do I do that? And that can be really helpful to you, like becoming overly critical. Things like that can be a repression of love rather than demonstrating appreciation, as Haydn was pointing out. Now, the second one, envy, is often...
If I can add this
sure.
right before we move to the second emotion, whatever it is that you're depressed about, it owns you. And it is always about seeking outside of yourself what you cannot find inside of yourself. What the mind does with depression, as well as any other negative mental state, is it generates the depression in the mind, but it expresses it through the body. And no matter what form or what you consider to be the source of your depression, without exception, it is always going to involve meaninglessness. And that's that existential crisis that is related to depression that no medication can cure. So essentially, the physical horizontal mind does not understand its relationship to the vertical spiritual mind. And so the existential crisis can only be resolved through spiritual understanding, which the mind is not capable of producing. But starting with love and taking a look at that, that's a great place to start.
And it actually is a good segue, Hayden, into the second emotion that often gets overlooked and downplayed, and really is, in the Buddhist tradition, is one of the 7 deadly sins, but we say envy. And envy is a really positive emotion that we all feel.
It's very healthy.
Right, it is part of our machinery. When it gets repressed is when it turns into jealousy. Like, well, if I can't have it, you shouldn't either. Or I'm going to take that because I deserve it, and if you have it, I should have it. That kind of thing is jealousy. But envy, when it gets expressed, is I want that in my life. I want to have the experience of, and I'm willing to work, whether it's school or work or in introspection or gaining the time of a teacher to help me get this in my life. This is something that I feel in my soul is important, and I'm willing to do what I need to do in order to achieve that, not take it from somebody else, not kill somebody else over. People kill over jealousy, whether it's of another person.
They also kill in the absence of love. If you don't love me, then you're not going to love anybody else. People
and it's hard to really get to the depth of that, speaking about it this way, but it's true. There's so much destruction on the repressed side. And if you are mapping this out, or if you're just listening, you can start to see that trend of not only are all these emotions connected, and you'll see their connection to depression as we continue over the next few minutes, but they have a really dark, destructive side to them, because it is the human being trying to answer that existential question in the horizontal daily life through possessions or through another person or through even like anything in the outer world, and it's impossible. And so that gets incredibly frustrating, and as you said, then addictions kick in, and we have all kinds of negative.
We're not taught that envy is a healthy emotion. In fact, I've heard it a million times of what people say to their children. Get used to it. That's the way life is. Life's not fair, etc., etc. But contained in you as a human being is also a very strong metaphysical reason or understanding of why envy is such a healthy emotion. And the way that I can state that is that if it's true about the universe, it's true about you. Now, there's a lot to say about that. We can cover that at another time. But it is thoroughly known that the universe continues to expand. And so do you. The question is how to expand consciously, but contained inside of you is this deep desire to live an incredible, extraordinary, expansive life. And that is that aspect of envy that allows you to get up in the morning and say, I want more of this.
Seeking.
I want to become this.
Aspiring, that's the word I was looking for, aspiring.
I want to become this. I want to have this in my life. So when envy is expressed, it turns into willpower.
And aspiration.
And desire, but not emotional desire. This is desire of the spirit. This is the desire of the higher part of you that says, I know that my life matters. I know that I am here to accomplish great things. But it's not connected to emotional desire, like I'm afraid that nobody loves me, so I want more love. This is connected, the expression of envy is connected to a higher part of yourself. Of course, desire can be associated with the emotional, and that's okay. It's a good beginning point, but there are higher points of envy inside of everybody. It's a wonderful, healthy emotion.
So honor that.
Honor that. Don't let anybody talk you out of it.
Don't hurt yourself. Don't take stuff that's not yours. But envy, as far as willpower, like you said, and determination is really powerful. Now, anger is the third emotion that we are exploring, and it really gets a rap.
It's a bad rap.
Anger is a very healthy, positive emotion when it is in response to, as we've said, an intentional higher purpose, or there's something that I am angry, like it's for the greater good. But what we normally equate with anger is actually the repressed form of anger, which is rage. Because we've been taught from the beginning to be nice. If you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. That's an old Bambi reference.
See, they don't call it road anger. They call it road rage.
Yeah.
Because you're out of control. And the rage, of course, as everyone knows, people kill out of rage.
Mm-hmm. But the actual rage is because the anger gets repressed, and then projected onto something else instead of an honest, courageous accountability for how I'm feeling.
Repressed anger always ends up in rage.
But expressed anger, and we equate this with courage because it takes courage to tell someone how you're really feeling, not after you've stuffed it down, then you explode, the straw that broke the camel's back. But as you're experiencing it and you're feeling like, this is not okay with me. This is not how I want our relationship to be. This is not how I want things to function at work. Things could be better than this, for example.
So with that in mind, there's one particular word that can always be used to describe healthy, positive anger, and that word is no. I'm done with this. I'm fed up with this. Mm-hmm. I'm tired of this. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to do this to myself anymore. I'm not going to live this way. And here comes expressed anger, which leads you into courage.
And sometimes, like Gandhi said no by not saying anything but not eating. There are different ways that people have said no. Rosa Parks said no by just sitting on the bus and not moving. But there are ways I really appreciate that no, however you say it or however you express it is, that's up to you. But it is this experience of no. I love that. And that does take courage because they may not like that. They may not like you.
Well, look at what happened to you when you were little and you got angry. What did they tell you? I said, I'll give you something to be angry about, or your anger was snuffed. And part of the reason why is because it activates the adult's anger, which is also generally is not in a very evolved state. So it activates the worst of the adult in dealing with children who express their anger. And what happens to a child in school when they get angry? You're taken to the principal's office.
And Haydn and we both taught in high school, and I remember fights in high school. Whoever started the fight, the person that maybe fought back got in as much trouble as the one that started it. It's like you're not even allowed to defend yourself. We also have a lot of gender stuff. We don't talk about gender very much, but there's a lot of gender stuff in our culture. There used to be anyway. That boys hit back, girls tell the teacher, those kinds of things. You better fight back.
There are a lot of cultural mores around all of the emotional states, but anger is really healthy when you allow your courage to come out of that, because it can really be an incredible impetus in your life to wake up and go, today's the day.
Or even to do the right thing, even when other people are not willing to do that, for example. We're not trying to get on the moral high ground, but just sometimes you may, for example, people are talking ugly about somebody else and you decide, no, I'm not going to be part of that. And then you end up being the one talked about next. Those kinds of things can be difficult, but at the same time, you're expressing the truth of who you are.
But until the emotion is expressed, as long as it resides in a repressed state, you cannot see reality. What you see are simply the remnants and the fallout of those repressed emotions.
And actually that brings us to fear, because the reason we repress the emotions is we're afraid of being unloved, afraid of getting in trouble, afraid of rocking the boat, all kinds of cliches like that. And so we repress our fear, and we're also told, be brave, you can do this, give it a try. Those are all good messages, but what the child starts to hear is it's not okay to be afraid. And when fear gets repressed...
And it's not okay for me to be me.
Yeah.
Children hear that message all the time.
Not spoken, but yes, inferred. Sometimes spoken.
Both, yeah, of course.
Yeah. But when fear gets repressed, and I've had this experience over totally nonsensical things where I almost can't move anymore. I'm so afraid that the boogeyman's going to jump out and get me or something like that. I've had moments like that in the dark, for example. But when fear gets repressed, we experience paralysis, actually. We can experience panic. Well, it's the fight, flight, or freeze.
Anxiety of all kinds.
And self-doubt kicks in. And so fear, now, there's no, as Haydn said before, psychological event without a physiological response. So the body can actually move into shaking or move into shut down. That's the freeze part that the body experiences. You might experience your throat closing and your jaw clenching, that you can't even get the words out that you want to get out. Fear is an incredibly powerful emotion that's healthy. It's meant to keep us safe. We're only born with two fears: the fear of loud noises, because loud noises mean, of
danger.
course, there's something's going to happen. And we're born with the fear of falling. We're supposed to have solid ground underneath us. We're not born with the fear of heights. We learn that.
But the
all
fear
the
of
other
those
fears are learned, which is fascinating
But
to
those
me.
two fears of falling and the fear of loud noises are really good.
Yeah.
They help us.
We should
stay
hang on
safe.
to those.
This is why the body will go into immediate unconscious response when hit with a real loud noise, because it means something's not right. Well, repressed fear will cause people to stay put when they should be on the run.
Yeah.
But
True.
there are all different responses to it. But there's the physical fear part, which is very healthy, the fear of, of being hurt, harmed. So we look twice before we cross the street. We
Hold the child's hand.
Right. We measure twice before we use the skill saw to cut up the lumber. Those are very, very wonderful aspects of healthy fear.
Consider the risks, yeah.
Right. But then you have the metaphysical fear, not the physical fear, but the metaphysical fear is always going to be connected to depression. And it's the issue of, for example, no one loves me. While it may feel physical, it really is an existential problem of not understanding the truth of who you are, that you have always been loved, always will be loved, but the mind doesn't know that. But when
can
fear,
I add something there? That we move into, with all of the repressed, if you're keeping up with this on your own paper or you're listening, all of these repressed emotions connect together to create this separation where I feel alone. I feel like I'm on my own. I'm this tiny little speck in the universe, and that I don't have support. I don't have any connection, and that's the farthest thing from the truth. But it's not what it feels like when I'm in these repressed states, which really is about isolation, because it's about survival. I'm repressing in order to survive, so I become more and more isolated. Well,
the repression is always absent of context. Mm-hmm. And context, if I could say it differently, the content of in your mind that produces the patterns, the templates that fuel the depression, the content is basically around the physical world and what you think is missing in your life, etc. But without the context, then it cannot be solved. The context, where the content is physical, the context is spiritual.
So the content,
one is visible, one is invisible.
So the content is, in your story, your mom and dad, when you came out and looked at your circumstances, and you're like, whoa. But the context is, why would I choose those experiences?
The context is your existence. Existence defines the experiences, but we are not taught that. That's why we think we are the experiences that we've had, like being rejected, or our partner tells us that they don't love us anymore. We think we are those experiences. So it's really important to understand, in terms of depression, that the content of the depression is going to create an identity. content with identity, but the context also creates identity. And this is why the spiritual movement from the physical to the metaphysical, you could say, has become so important in the world in which we live. If you see a distorted world, if you see a screwed up world that is at the basis of your depression, that screwed up world lies inside of you. It's not out there. It's what you think is out there, but that doesn't make it real. So here's that issue of depression creating identity with the content of that makes up that depression.
And that's a pretty big leap for me to consider that what I see out there is what I've created in here. But if I can move to expressed fear, that takes me into certainty. That takes me into faith. I'm not talking about religious faith here, of course, but I'm talking about this understanding that everything, I'm not this tiny little infinitesimal speck in the universe, that everything is connected, everything is held
You
in
are
safety.
a center of will. Mm-hmm. And when that will is used, when you finally, say, accomplish breaking through a personal limitation and you have the experience, my God, I did this. Mm-hmm. I know I can do this, and now I can do more. And that leads us to the fifth emotion, which I consider to be the most important of all the five. And do you want a drum roll here? And that emotion is grief. Grief is so important because it lies at the basis of understanding the source of depression. A really good definition of grief that I think came up, I think I read this in Conversations with God. I think it was book 2 of 3. It was Neil Donald Walsh was the author. And he's having this conversation with God, and if I remember correctly, God provides the definition of grief as being saying goodbye when you don't want to. And if you think about that, you go, my God, that's it. That's what grief is.
Whether
it's having to let go when you
that
don't want to.
Person you love, or a marriage, or a job, or
it's a 3-year-old losing their favorite toy and moving into upset and tears, and then what do we say? It's just a toy. Get over it. Don't. And so this issue of grief is profound, of how deeply it gets repressed in our lives.
I remember working with a woman who would freeze up when she had conflict at work. And as we talked, she said, the first time I remember that experience, I was 4 years old. I was out playing in the yard, and a snake came across the yard, and I froze. And she said, my dad looked out in the yard and saw this little statue standing there. And he came out and literally had to pick me up. She said I was like a block of marble. And as he talked to me, the snake was long gone. She said I finally was able to tell him about the snake. And she said, I still react that same way. And that's back to your story, that the origin of it can be way back. Sometimes we know where it was, sometimes we don't. But it can be way back, and it's something that we learn to do as a child, and we still implement the same strategy today as adults.
Well, let's go ahead and, since you brought that up, let's go ahead and answer a very important question related to depression. Is it important that I be able to define and know the source of my depression? Mm-hmm. And the answer is unequivocally no. Mm-hmm. But you do have to address the emotional framework that has enveloped it. And grief is going to be one of the most important emotions to address in that framework.
Because, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
When grief gets repressed, it is, I probably shouldn't say this way, but in my experience of all these years of working with people and in my own life, it's the most debilitating emotion to repress, because it's so dark. It becomes so endarkened. It's the source of...
It's the source of depression.
It's the source of depression because we become so hopeless and despairing, and this it's like this darkness drags us down into the sludge of repressed emotion, and all of it connected: love, fear, anger, envy. I remember after my dad died, I would be in the card section getting a card, and I'd see Father's Day cards and get angry and sad and envious that other people were buying Father's Day cards, and I couldn't. It's all wrapped into one. This repressed grief becomes all of it, and there's such a heaviness to it.
Well, this is what Dr. Speed taught me. I was just 27 years old, and he said to me, following a very profound experience that he had put me through, he asked me what the source of my depression was. And of course I said, it's all the abuse and all this stuff. And he just smiled at me and said, no, it's not. He said, the source of your depression is repressed grief. And as a result of that, and what would happen, I'm not trying to say that this is going to be true for everyone, but literally that day I stopped because I got it. I understood what he was saying, but then the work had to take place. I may be a lot of things. I may be, there are things that I have not been able to become in my life, but I do consider myself to be a master of grief because I had to, in order to not just deal with it, but to be able to overcome it. And simultaneously, 20 years ago, I still got popped. It still rose up again. Now, to my knowledge, it hasn't happened since that time. But what he began to teach me was how to cry. He began to teach me how to deliberately and consciously set time aside in my week schedule to generally be in what I call a relaxation pose, which is on your back, maybe a nice warm blanket, nice soft music that has been carefully selected, the music that I used all the time in all those years that I worked with this was Daniel Kobiaka's music. It was perfect
That's still
for
our
me.
favorite music.
So it is just profoundly valuable in working with the issue of grief. So I would set time aside. It was like on my calendar, Thursday night, 9 o'clock, after the kids are in bed, I'm going to start crying. In other words, I'm going to lay down, I'm going to get still, I'm going to move inside, and I'm going to bring the grief and the sadness up. Now, when you take a look, if you go back a couple of emotions, that's really all anger is. Anger is just a blanket for sadness.
And I remember
and
you
sadness
sharing that.
is related to grief, but when it gets repressed, it turns into depression. So you have to learn, well, I shouldn't say that. You don't have to do anything. But what I found was so valuable was learning how to approach and embrace the grief and the losses that I had experienced in my life. And I've always said that once I started learning to cry, I have never been able to stop. But as the years went by, I watched, as I am today, the tears that I sometimes, or I should say often feel, are tears of joy, of the privilege of being in a physical body on this planet, just the privilege of being able to experience this beautiful world.
Thank you, Haydn, for sharing that. That was really powerful. Those are the 5 major emotions: love, envy, anger, fear, and grief. And you can consider today, you can start expressing maybe just one of those. And love is the easiest one to start with, I think. But then you may have a different idea. But start expressing your emotions in a healthy, conscious way, not projecting stuff onto other people, but start expressing appreciation and certainty and willpower.
Well, when you see the descriptors of emotions expressed, you see an entirely different reality than the reality exists than when they're repressed.
Creator of their life rather than a victim of their life.
You see someone expanding their universe.
And that brings us to our second point.
Point number 2 is that the source of depression, there are 2 pieces to it. One that I've already shared, which is repressed grief. That's the physical side of it. The metaphysical, spiritual side of depression is the feeling of a terrible lack of something, a condition that no psychology and no therapy and no religion and no physical pleasure, and I want to be careful about saying this, and no medication can heal. I'm not anti-medication. Right. There are times when depression can be so severe that it's even, causing the individual to question their life. That medication, of course, is very, very appropriate. But you can make so much progress on your own by understanding this.
And that terrible lack of something, Haydn, could be of purpose, of a sense of belonging or of being loved, or a sense of, even it could be not having enough materially that
it's
I'm so
not
afraid.
Understanding the truth of who you are and what you're doing here, which can only be learned or known by moving out of the mind and into the spiritual. Point number 3 is, how do you resolve this? Mm-hmm. And so I don't want to be repetitive, but and this can require maybe needing to work with a teacher about gaining skills and abilities to experience grief and to begin to apply that strategy in your life, allowing time for your tears and upset, but through the appropriate lens. It's not just about crying, but learning how to approach grief consciously. And that's,
It's like... It's letting go. It's when I remember telling our teacher, Nancy Willis, something that had been really painful for me. And I told her I was embarrassed to share it. It felt like it wasn't that important, but it was really weighing on me. And so I kind of got up my courage and I told her what I was dealing with in my heart and my brain. And she just looked at me. She didn't laugh at me. She didn't really sympathize with me. She just said, well, now that you've said it out loud, it has that big gorilla, she said, is kind of like a chimpanzee swinging around the room. And I said, that's exactly right. Sometimes just being willing to acknowledge this is what I'm feeling or dealing with, and to say it out loud. That in and of itself can take some of the weight off.
Absolutely. The secret to resolving depression, like I said, just to make sure that I'm clear about the point, is the physical part of it, which is expressing grief and allowing yourself to feel loss, and because expressed grief leads to letting go.
It actually leads to love.
And it will lead to love, but it can take some time. But the secret is not about trying to change your depression, which is your stuff. The secret is about beginning a spiritual path that leads to the truth of who and what you are. You're not your past. You're not your experiences. You are the divine and physical form playing a game of hide and go seek. And when you first get a glimpse of breaking through that depression, you won't go back. Now, it can take some time for those patterns to resolve themselves, but at least then at that point, you're on your way.
And if this conversation has been at all helpful to you, we invite you to subscribe, to like our podcast, so that you can stay in touch and hear other topics as we continue to explore these dynamics that affect your daily life, your relationships, the quality of your life. And if you'd like some more of this, you can also consider joining our private, we have an online community at becomingyoujourney.com. You can go to truthspringasheville.com.
That's our website.
Is ASHEVILLE, to explore different workshops that we have.
And a lot of resources.
So we're also going to be hosting and teaching a consciousness workshop in New York, July 31st through August 2nd. And you can see information about that in the show notes below, but it's at the Omega Institute up in New York. We're super excited about that too. So we have things here in Asheville. We'll be in New York.
And their website is eomega.org.
We hope to see you again. We are really committed to this work, to being able to help people improve their lives and move into a more spiritual and conscious understanding of who you are and why you're here.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
We hope to see you again soon.